I'd like to call this regular council meeting on April 12th, 2022 to order with adoption of the agenda. Councillor Ryan, second by Councillor Charlotte. All in favor? Motion's carried. Adoption of the minutes of the regular council meeting of March 22nd. Someone want to make that? Councillor Charlotte, Councillor Palmer. All in favor? Motion's carried. Adoption of the special council meeting minutes of March 25th. Someone make that order. Councillor Charlotte, Councillor Palmer. All in favor? Motion's carried. And then adoption of the special council minutes of April 5th. Councillor Charlotte, Councillor Palmer. All in favor? Motion's carried. Thank you. Any business arising from the minutes of March 22nd? Councillor Palmer.
Thank you, Mayor Sulz. Just regarding short-term rental enforcement options, we did make a resolution taking a look at that, but I think really we need to have a much more in-depth discussion on that. And I believe staff are probably working on a presentation, but I think we really need to have a really sharp focus. Otherwise, there's just too many things. I think we need to provide a more focused policy decision.
Yeah. All right, thank you for that. Any other business arising from those minutes? Seeing none, I'll move on to special council meeting of March 25th. Seeing none, the council meeting of April 5th. Seeing none, we'll move on to item 5A, planning and development, variance permit. So, Mr. Simon, do you have anything, or Ms. Hartling, to add or as a presentation for this development variance permit?
To your worship and council, no, there is no presentation, but Ms. Hartling, as the file manager, is here to answer questions should council have any.
All right, thank you for that. Is there a council that wants to put this motion on the table for me? Councillor Charlotte.
The development variance permit DBP 2021-016 be approved at 1840 Trans-Canada Highway number 1 West as in the package.
Okay. And then subject to, is that all one motion, Ms. Floyd?
Should be.
Yes, your worship, it is.
All right. And then subject to the following precondition to issuance being met, approval from BC Hydro, required for BC Hydro right away. Okay, so is there a seconder for that motion? Councillor Elliott. Discussion on the motion. Councillor Palmer.
Thank you, Mayor Sulz. I don't think I am supportive of this. Concerns about the proliferation of signs, what I would call sign pollution. And how this might start to put the wedge into more and more of this kind of clutter on our corridors. I see it basically as a marketing item, and I'm not so sure that it's even needed from a business model, because people would be looking on their apps where to get fueled. So that's, I guess, the first part. And then the second part is on the public consultation, the 100 meters, and we've talked about this before, but I am inclined to say that this is affecting our community in a greater sense. It's a very visible area. And as we start to clutter up signs, I think, we've had some good, robust sign bylaws, but I think they're starting to be diluted over a period of time. So I do have reticence on this particular file.
Okay, thank you for that. Any other comments from Councillor Elliott?
Just wondering why the planning department, we made it clear that less is sometimes better on the signage front. This seems to be contrary to that. I'm just wondering why they would go from one approved valid sign to 3.
Okay, so any comments, Ms. Hartling or Mr. Simon, Ms. Hartling on this? And then I'll go to Councillor Bergso.
Through your chair, in my understanding, the question is why from 1 to 3? Is that the question?
Well, just in general, is it maybe it's a question for you on what is your policy on signage? Do we want a proliferation of signage where we don't need them? I don't know whether we need 3 signs for a Shell gas station on a very busy corner. I'm not sure.
Through the chair, the 2 signs are existing. So it would be recognizing the non-conforming sign currently that predates the sign bylaw, but it is in place. So it'd be recognizing a second sign, and then the third sign is for the electrical vehicle charging station signage identifying the parking stalls. Directional signs, there are some exemptions for on-site directional signage, but there is a size requirement. So if the sign is over that specified requirement, then it would be considered a freestanding sign. And then there is one per lot that would be permitted. So they're proposing a third freestanding sign, and that's what's in front of council today, if this is an appropriate signage for the subject property.
Any comments, Councillor?
Well, just maybe, is there a policy that the planning department adheres to regarding the number of signs or the type of signs that you would permit?
There's a sign bylaw, is that not correct, Ms. Hartman?
Yes, through your worship. So the current bylaw for the variance is a sign bylaw, and it's just a blanket one per lot. So it doesn't consider whether you're on the highway or downtown commercial properties. So there are different types of signs, like there's billboard signs for along the highway permitted for certain properties. But these properties is just freestanding signs. So it's a case-by-case review on if it's an appropriate sign for that subject property and where the location is, and if it's going to be an impact to any traffic or any of the visitors to that subject property.
Okay, so I'm going to go to Councillor Burchill. He's had his hand up for a while, and then we'll get around the table. Councillor Burchill.
Thank you. I'm just, I'm curious. So I understand. So the proponents allowed one sign. They have two, which predates the sign bylaw. So if this variance is defeated, would that mean that their second sign would not be allowed anymore?
Through your worship, no, they could keep the second sign.
Okay.
So I'll go around the table and I'll make comments. So Councillor Shirlette.
Thank you, Richard. The directional sign that you referred to in the sign bylaw, what's the maximum size of a directional sign, and what is this compared to? And forgive me if it's in the report and I missed it.
An on-site directional sign is an area of 0.6 meters squared, so 6.5 square feet. This current sign is, let me just look here. I believe it's 3 square meters from the base.
Okay. Thank you. While I recognize the concern around precedence, I think there is room for a conversation around our sign bylaw. I think as is fine, because in most cases, one freestanding sign per lot is lots. And that would keep that proliferation of signs under control. But in this particular circumstance, and in other lots that I've seen, we're like, why don't they have better signage? Oh, they're only allowed one. And the way the lot is laid out, sometimes it does make more sense to have two if they're done tastefully. When it comes to electrical vehicle charging, while yes, I recognize the users are using their app to go find that charging station, I think there is value in having loud and proud charging stations throughout our country. Through our community, so that people can see them on a regular basis and gain that comfort with their proliferation, that it will not be difficult to charge their vehicle. So I think as we move through electric vehicle adoption, I think there is value in providing for these larger signs more often, while I also recognize that there are a lot of signs in our world, and I don't know that people really pay attention to them. So I'm hoping that this is consistent signage with other electric vehicle stations, so at least there's that repetition factor that's helping. But in this case, on this lot, for those reasons, I am in support of this motion.
Any other comments from council? Okay, so when I look at this, so this proposed freestanding sign, Ms. Hartling, that will go right by the chargers. I'm not seeing a height. It's not going to be, 10 meters high or something like that. It's just fairly low to the ground, just above the charges. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's correct, Your Worship. I'm not sure if Jalene's scrolling through. There should be an image there in the council package showing a rendering of what the sign would look like in that location with that right there. So it would be just a bit over the charging stations. That's the exact size and the exact look of the sign.
Thank you for that. Any other comments from council? So in light of what I'm seeing, and you know, I'm not in disagreement with Councillor Palmer, and especially as we go forward, you know, not going to be that many years down the road, but there'll be an electrical charger probably at every filling station and that sort of thing. But the fact that the two signs are in existence and the other one's just going to go over the charging spot, I will support this variance. So, any other comments from councillors?
Is it lit up? Will this sign be a lighted sign, or is it just, what I see here, it doesn't look like it's got lights or anything associated with it? Just a, yeah.
Any comment, Ms. Hartman?
Yeah, through Your Worship, there's no lights with the sign.
No lights on that sign. Yeah, Councillor Palmer.
So for a question through to the planner, can this, with the passing of this motion, could this sign be changed, and does it have to go through some approval process? So could there be a large sign like the other ones because now they have a variance that entitles them to it?
Ms. Hartman?
Through Your Worship, they have a corresponding sign permit application. So no, they would have to have the sign permit issued to what is approved in the variance, with the plans attached to the variance. So it would be the exact sign that you're looking at right here.
And then just for, so the rendering that you show that's on the screen right now, I'm not clearly seeing, it's got the proposed freestanding sign. Do we know the exact height of that sign?
Ms. Hartman?
Yeah, through Your Worship, we have that in the sign permit. I can bring it up here though. So it's 0.5 meters maximum height.
0.5 meters.
Okay.
You know, through the mayor, council, you know, this seems like it's not apples and oranges compared to what we're thinking about freestanding signs.
Right.
If it was the other ones, I would be opposed to it. It looks like that possibly we need to review our sign bylaw and what that means. And I think there's other concerns in the community anyways on how we're doing signage. And I think that's something that we should be reviewing. We got a lot on our plate, but I think that's something that maybe we should just flag. Maybe it's for the new council, but yeah.
Okay,
Yeah.
thank you for that. Any other comments on the motion on the table? Seeing none, I will call the question. All those in favor? That's unanimous. Thank you. Thank you, council. Thank you, Ms. Hartley, Mr. Simon. Let's move on to just briefly announcements from the mayor. Just, you know, we're all aware the vaccine card requirements are now gone. Just I've said the message going out this week that our facilities are open to all, and they'll be able to attend to our facilities without worrying about the status of the vaccine and providing that card. So thank you for that. Let's move on to 9A, Municipal Ticket Information System Amendment Bylaw 2322. Someone want to put that motion on the table for me, please? Councilor Charlotte.
Municipal Ticket Information System Amendment Bylaw number 2322 be adopted.
Seconder for the motion, please. Councilor Palmer, any discussion on the motion? Seeing none, I'll call the question. All those in favor? Motion's carried. Thank you. Moving on to item 9B. Someone want to put that on the table? Go ahead, Councillor Gillette.
That zoning amendment bylaw number 2320 be read a third time.
Seconder for the motion, please. Councillor Elliott. Any discussion on that motion? Councillor Palmer.
Just a question to planning. Just for quick reminder for me, on the 0 parking spaces for ski lifts and ski runs, can you just describe how this affects the day use? And just want to make sure that we're not making a mistake as far as parking availability for day users.
Through your worship to Councillor Palmer. Yeah, so this is something that's pretty common in most resorts where you have your centralized parking area, which serves as the main day use parking for all visitors that are coming for the ski lifts. We've been in direct correspondence with the resort to make sure that they have appropriate provisions for parking on those very, very heavy days, and that if overflow parking is needed, then that's something that would be made available. They are going to be working on shifting the parking area. I think, Council, if you recall, you would have seen a presentation given to you by the resort some time ago now that looked at their long-term development plans. So in terms of having a proper parking area that's a proper structure as well, that will be something that will be coming before council pretty shortly for consideration as well. So yes, it is definitely at the forefront of the conversation to make sure that sufficient parking is provided on site.
Thanks for your question. Councillor Palmer, go ahead.
So in theory, with the passing of this bylaw, and for whatever reason the other doesn't get done, could they, in theory, have 0 parking spaces for day use if they just decide to close them down? I'm not suggesting they would do that, but.
So through your worship, one point actually to clarification is that our current bylaw doesn't have any provisions for ski lift or ski runs, right? It's something that would typically be managed by the resort themselves. And obviously it's in the resort's interest to make sure that they have adequate parking available for members of the public and travelers as they're coming to the resort. So this is really just providing that clarification that for these uses at the resort specifically, the intent is for there to be the centralized day lot parking operations, which is required in accordance with their master development agreement with the province, required in accordance with their provisions of the official community plan from us to make sure that they have sufficient day use parking. So there are other mechanisms by which they need to provide this parking for. So just by clarifying in the bylaw that the intent is for it to be in this centralized parking location, it's aligning the zoning bylaw with those other approvals that the resort currently has.
Great, Councillor.
And so just, if I'm hearing this right, there's other provisions, so the master plan or whatever that requires the parking. And then I think my final question is, if the requirement for this is 0, why would we have this in the bylaw at all?
Through your worship, it just provides that clarification, right? And this is one of the items that the planning group is really keen on to make sure that we have that continuity in how we're interpreting bylaws, so that regardless of who is sitting in the seat, when the question arises that the resort is developing X, Y, and Z, it's very clear in our bylaws and it's very clear for everyone to understand what those ultimate requirements are.
Hey, Councillor Gillette.
Thank you, Worship. Yeah, because I was just going to comment on that last topic because I was eyeballing it a bit too. But at least it clarifies that the 0 parking spaces are for shops that are within a 450-meter radius of those day use parking areas. So as they shift their day use parking areas and they look at creating more spaces for retail, it does force them to have day use parking areas within a certain distance of any shopping area. Right. So at least there's that clarity there.
Good. All right. Any further comments on the motion on the table? Seeing none, I'll call the question. All those in favor? Opposed? Motion's carried. Thank you. Moving on to item number 2. Someone want Councillor Gillette.
The zoning amendment bylaw number 2320 be adopted.
Seconder for the motion, please. Councillor Elliott. Any further discussion on this motion? Just adopting what we just read 3rd time. All those in favor? Motion's carried. Thank you. Moving on to item 9C. Someone want to put that on the table? Councillor Gillette.
That the water regulations amendment bylaw number 2291 be adopted.
Seconder for the motion, please. Councillor Palmer. Any discussion on the motion? Okay.
Sorry, Gary, What, maybe I didn't get the details on this. So the water regulations, we're adding new restrictions or?
So we did third reading last meeting on regulations. Mr. Black, do you want to elaborate a bit for Councillor Elliott?
Thank you, Your Worship, to Councillor Elliott. This bylaw amendment is to allow the city to charge for sustainable farming within the community, so such that we support the sustainable farming in the community, but we actually want to recover the charges that are for the utilization of that water.
So this is the first meter. They're going to put a meter on the water flow. Is that right? So this
Correct.
Is demonstration. It's the route we want to go in the future.
Correct.
All right. Any further discussion? Seeing none, I'll call the question. All those in favor? Opposed? Motion's carried. Thank you. Moving on to item C2. Councillor Charlotte.
That fees and charges amendment bylaw number 2321 be adopted.
Second for the motion, please. Councillor Elliott. Discussion on this motion. Seeing none, I'll call the question. All those in favor? Motion's carried. Thank you. Thank you, Councillor Brooksville. I am watching to make sure. Thank you. Moving on to item D, Official Community Plan Amendment Bylaw 2311. And so do we have a presentation on this, Mr. Simon? Nothing, it's just, we're just basically amending the bylaw or adopting it, correct?
Through your worship, yeah, no presentation. This is consideration of adoption for the BC housing project.
All right, thank you. Councillor Charlotte.
Table, the Official Community Plan Amendment Bylaw 2311 be adopted.
Second for the motion, Councillor Ryan. Any discussion on this motion? Councillor Elliott.
I know, Paul, I could ask BC Housing, have you been in touch with them recently? And what, if any, are they giving as a timeline for the project?
Through your worship to Councillor Elliott, yes, we are in contact with them. They are very keen to see this bylaw be adopted. And again, staff have been very clear in communicating that we will do whatever we can to overlap process to get this in the ground as soon as possible. With respect to exact timelines, they have not established those yet. The next phase of the project would be, pending council support for adoption of the bylaws before you. They would delve into their detailed review. BC Housing works pretty pragmatically. And so once one step of the process is done, that's when they move on to the next step. There's not that much overlapping, but we have had some discussions with them to see if there are any opportunities to overlap development permit, building permit, things of that nature, so that we can get phase one in the ground as soon as possible.
That's great. Thank you. I've just, I've just been reading in other communities and they are already at the finish line on a number of projects. And I'm just wondering why it's, we're behind. We seem to be behind anyway.
Yeah, and so as Mr. Simon said, they do it in that pragmatic fashion, one step after the Councillor Palmer.
Yeah, thank you, Mayor. So just further to Councillor Elliott, I think the city's been working really well with BC Housing. It's come on a timely basis. I note also that a month or so ago, the province was threatening to flex their muscles on municipalities on the ability to have due process and threatening to take away rights of municipalities. Separate topic, but it's I think something that's been there that they're kind of forcing a mandate there. Notwithstanding that, I think we've given them very good due diligence, including by council.
Absolutely. Yeah, thank you for that comment. All right, I'll call the question. All those in favor? Motion's carried. Thank you. Thank you, Councillor Brooksville. All right, moving on to item D2. Someone want to put the zoning amendment? Councillor Charlotte.
The zoning amendment bylaw number 2312 be adopted.
Second for the motion. Councillor Elliott, any discussion on this? This is just the zoning amendment bylaw that goes along with the OCP amendment bylaw. Councillor Charlotte.
Just a quick comment further to what you were talking to there, Councillor Palmer, with the conversation from the province and zoning and wanting to see municipalities be friendly to rezoning their properties for medium and higher densities. And I think our council has shown a great appetite for having that conversation and having that conversation with our community through the OCP bylaw amendments and the big project that we're doing right now, trying to define what does it look like to have medium density. And as we've seen with the variety of different amendments and variances that have come to us, and the zoning amendments that people are looking to make these kind of developments, the next stage is how do we have that conversation with our community so that we can address these very valid concerns that come with increasing density. So better transportation, better snow removal, better parking solutions. All these pieces go along with it. And I think the fact that our council is willing to come to the table and make those changes and take those steps goes a long way for us to then go back to the province and continue to have these conversations when it comes to grant funding and other interesting projects, like the conversation we'll be having on Thursday about our transit review.
Right. Good. Yeah, thank you for that comment. Any other comments? Seeing none, I'll call the question. All those in favor? Motion's carried. Thank you. Moving on to item E, short-term rental business license. Someone want to put that motion on the table? Councillor Ryan.
Business licensing and regulation amendment bylaw number 2305 be read first, second, and third time.
Second for the motion, please. Councillor Palmer. Any discussion on this motion? Councillor Charlotte.
So I've been trying to read through this as well as I could. Now, Councillor Palmer had mentioned at the beginning of the meeting when we were looking at the minutes from previous council meetings, I think talking about this topic that we need to have a robust, fulsome conversation. Is that this conversation or further to this after this step?
Councillor Palmer, you want to respond?
Yeah, so I think it's after this step, but we got to make sure we're not tardy in not having that conversation.
Right.
And on the holistic thing, because we know that with the short-term rentals, we haven't magically solved all the problems.
Right.
And so, and on the enforcement side, if we just leave it wide open, then it's just going to be a mess for staff and for the community.
Yeah. All right.
Right, and sorry, Your Worship, I'm just looking, I knew I'd seen some other pieces as well. It is on the docket for Thursday's conversation at Committee of the Whole, the policy conversation, so that centers my brain on where we are in this huge process.
And Mr. Simon has some good.
Finally coming in for a landing.
Yeah, has some things to bring up and some policies that we can discuss. Very robust conversation with that. All right.
Thank you.
All right, Councilor.
So I have some questions. Are we going to have that conversation now then?
We can have a conversation.
Some of them are about the other two bylaws, and I'm having a hard time kind of separating them. So I'll just sort of go in the order of my notes.
Okay.
In the report, there's mention of the summary of changes on page 2, which is page 50 in the package. That just outlines some of the changes, so proof of ownership and permanent residency, all that kind of stuff. I'm just curious if that also applies to B and like better practices.
Any comment, Mr. Simon?
Sorry about that, I hit the wrong button. Sorry, I'm just trying to follow along with where you're at through your worship to Councillor Ryan. Are you looking at attachment 4, the supporting information documents, or are you looking at one of the bylaws?
I'm not in the attachment yet. I'm just in the report under the discussion section where it talks about the business licensing bylaw amendments, and there's a few bullet points, and I'm just curious if those apply to better practices as well as short-term rentals.
Gotcha. So through your worship, Councillor Ryan, where applicable, they would apply to bed and breakfast. So such as providing proof of residency. So for existing bed and breakfast operations, you know, they continue to get their renewals and will operate. One of the key things right now that from planning's view is a bit of a gap in our existing business licensing bylaws is the only regulations that we have really for bed and breakfast are embedded within a definition of bed and breakfast. We don't have supplementary regulations in our zoning bylaw to guide it. We don't have conditions within our business licensing bylaw to amend it. So this was a really, or to regulate it rather, this was a really good opportunity when we were doing the short-term rental amendments to make sure that where it's applicable to bed and breakfast, such as being the permanent resident on site, we include those provisions in the business licensing bylaw so that we have not only the clarity, but also something easy to point to for enforcement purposes. Should there be people that are trying to skirt around short-term rental rules to be a bed and breakfast, for instance, then we have the tools that we need to enforce properly.
Yeah, perfect. That's great. Can I keep going?
Yeah, you have another question?
I got all kinds of questions. For fees and charges, bylaw amendments, I know we're not quite at the fees and charges, but just commenting that I think that fee, the base fee for both short-term rentals and bed and breakfasts should be much higher. I think anybody who's pursuing that avenue is going to be making quite a significant amount, and especially given the shortfall in revenue that will be generated versus the enforcement costs, I think it makes sense to increase those fees. And I'm still in the report, and under the municipal ticket information bylaw amendments, that last paragraph talks about operators refusing to come into compliance and that continue to operate. Will there be warnings issued, and if so, how many warnings?
So through your worship, and this will be a really good conversation on Thursday for the policy, because the policy, we envision it as having a section on enforcement that will spell out the process that staff would follow to give that guidance. What we're envisioning right now and kind of the discussion that's been underway to date is basically a 3-month grace period where it's a big education blitz. So that would take us to approximately the end of July, where we really want to promote the new regulations. We want people to come in. You'll see all the supporting information that's in the package today. We'll tweak it as needed based on council direction, but we want to be able to get the word out of what the regulations are so that people have the opportunity to come into compliance. Then after the fact, the idea right now, and again, we'll be looking for some direction from council, whether or not this is appropriate. I don't want to go too far down the road because it will be the discussion on Thursday, but we will be looking at kind of a 2-step approach, a warning letter to say, come in and apply by the state. And if you don't apply by the state, then it's immediate enforcement action, which may include, but not limited to, issuance of tickets.
Okay, so kind of one warning after the grace period.
Correct, as of right now, yes.
Gotcha. I'm just out of process. I'm a bit confused. So we're having a discussion on Thursday, but we're having a discussion today. What's the difference?
Okay, do you want to just clarify that, Mr. Simon? So we're basically amending the bylaws to read first, second, and third time, and we're going to discuss in committee of the whole policy, that sort of thing, and then if there's changes to that, it will come back for adoption. Is that correct? Is that how I'm reading this?
Through your worship, yes, that is correct. The whole idea is that the administrative bylaws that are before you today, a municipal ticket information bylaw, for instance, it's not going to give you details on the process that you go through to enforce some of the regulations. It's going to say, for a violation of this offense, you get this fine. The business licensing bylaw, again, it's not going to have the details for enforcement. It's going to say, here's the requirements that you need to abide by as a business license holder for this type of operation. Fees and charges bylaw, again, same thing. It's saying this is what you got to pay for this type of business. So you can see how they all relate to the short-term rental discussion, but there's still that piece that's giving the direction on enforcement, for instance, that we want to address through a policy that we anticipate to be a bit of a larger conversation with council. So that's why the decision was made to have that discussion independently on Thursday, so that council can focus on the 3 supporting bylaws that are before you today that don't really get into the nitty gritty of how we go about enforcing these regulations. That would be covered under the separate policy.
Perfect, thank you. Does that answer your question?
I'm still pretty confused, I'm not gonna lie, but I'm just gonna keep asking my questions, and then if they overlap with Thursday's conversation, then someone can shut me up. So I'm into the supporting documentation now that was provided for the operator's guidebook. And I had a question about if there was a legal secondary suite. I think they had mentioned this, or it is mentioned elsewhere, but it has a door that connects to another, and it's clear that the intent is that it's a separate dwelling unit, but they advertise it, and they sort of advertise it as such. Will that person not be able to have a bed and breakfast?
So through your worship, these types of situations are the situations that need to be evaluated on a case-by-case basis, because every layout, every building is going to be a little bit different. And you'll see, and this is the conversations that are challenging for staff, and it's usually the ones that planners don't like to find themselves in, where someone says, well, what about if I do this? What about if I take this out? What about if I open up this? Do I comply then? Because what we really want to get at with these regulations and the messaging that's going to be consistently coming from the planning group once we're administering this is, what are you looking to do? Are you looking to operate tourist accommodation for short-term purposes out of a separate self-contained dwelling unit? If the answer is yes, and we got some examples in there, this is what we consider to be a self-contained dwelling unit. If that's what you're looking to do, then it's a short-term rental. Don't try and disguise it as a bed and breakfast. Are you looking at inviting people into your home? Maybe your home's laid out in a way that they kind of have their space, you have your space, but you still have shared access to some common areas and they're renting out some bedrooms. Well, then you're doing a bed and breakfast. And we want to be really clear with the public and applicants that, if you're trying to make a short-term rental in a self-contained dwelling unit, a bed and breakfast, it's going to be a more difficult process for you to go through. If you have an existing legal secondary suite, that's a fully self-contained dwelling unit, and you want to take it out so that you can do a bed and breakfast, that's going to be a challenging thing to do. And it's not just a matter of pull the oven out and you're good to go. That's where it's going to be a case-by-case basis that we need to discuss. And we really want to frame this as, what are you looking to do? Follow the regulations to have the appropriate path to pursue that use. Don't try and, make the bylaw be tailored to your specific situation. Conform with the requirements of the bylaw, and it's going to be a much easier time for you to go through the process.
Yeah.
Councilor Ryan, before you carry on, so is any of the questions that you're asking actually related to the first and second and third readings of what we're going through now, or do you think most of this is going to be more applicable for our conversation Thursday?
I don't know, because I still don't understand the difference between our conversations, but they seem to me to all relate to the bylaws that we're talking about.
Okay, so what's your next question? Then
it's a suggestion for a word change on page 3.
okay, so that guide should be something we discuss on Thursday. If you're going to do word changes and whatnot, we're talking about the amendment bylaws now, and so basically those aren't related to that guide that you have.
Okay.
Okay. Any other councilors with, sorry, Councilor Palmer, looking at the computer, go ahead, please.
Yeah, thank you, Mayor Sulz. I think Councilor Ryan has a valid point. There's this little bit of a chicken and egg thing. I'm going to suggest that the motion on the table right now be amended to be just first and second reading. And then that will give us the opportunity to tweak if necessary, or just to understand in context of Thursday's discussion. And I'm suggesting that would be the case for items 2 and 3 as well, that we just do first and second reading.
Okay, so who moved this? Councilor Charlotte, Councilor Elliott?
No.
Councilor Charlotte, Councilor Palmer?
I read it, I think.
Yeah, I think it was Ryan and I, but I can put
Okay, all right, so that's fine. So are both of you okay with amending that to go back to first and second reading?
Yeah, that's fine.
Okay, so then in light of that, that gives a chance to amend some of these things and have a wholesome discussion with staff on Thursday. You guys okay with that? And so will that change anything from your perspective, Mr. Simon?
Through your worship, the only comment I would have is just on timing. But I believe, and the corporate officer can correct me if I'm wrong, if this is still brought back to council, let's say on the 19th and all the concerns have been addressed, that we would still be able to do third reading and adoption on the 19th. I might be mistaken there. We might have to do it after the 19th then.
The third reading and adoption need 24 clear hours between them.
Okay, so if we need to throw in a, so let's talk about that well, let's talk about it now. So do you guys want to do a secondary meeting 24 hours after to adopt if you get all this stuff tweaked? So I'm asking council now. Comment from Council Ryan.
Yeah, why don't we just have the discussion now, and then if there's changes, then they can be made before, or can they not be made after third reading?
We'll have to repeal the third.
Pardon me?
What's that?
Actually, I guess it's a question for the corporate officer.
So, Ms. Floyd, that question, can changes be made after third reading before we adopt it?
Through your worship, we would have to rescind third and reread it.
Okay. Councilor Charlotte.
Would it be suitable to schedule a special council meeting on Thursday after the committee of the whole, so that if we wanted to do any changes after that policy discussion at that time, we can make those recommendations and do third reading at that time?
Any comment, Ms. Floyd?
I think if council was amenable to that, it would make sense. That way it could be adopted on the 19th, or sorry, yeah, on the 19th if there weren't any changes in addition to that.
Okay, so council, are you okay with that sort of scenario where we actually do first and second reading? We'll go through the discussion on Thursday committee of the whole, and we'll have a special council meeting to do the third reading. Council Palmer?
Yeah, question to the corporate officer. The friendly amendment going to first and second reading, is that okay, or would it be better if it was a formal amendment?
I think it would be preferable to be a formal amendment.
So
do you want to rescind that motion that we've already put on, or?
no, I'll make a motion to amend the motion to read first and second time.
Okay, and you're both in agreement with that? So Ms. Floyd, are we doing the right way that you want it, or do you want us to vote on it and re-put it on?
No, sorry, Your Worship. So Councillor Palmer made the amending motion. We just need somebody to second it.
Oh, so Councillor Ryan has seconded that amending motion, sorry.
Okay.
All right, we're going to vote on that amendment. All right, all those in favor? Motion's carried. So now we're going back to the original, which is first, second, and third reading. Is that correct?
First and second.
First and second.
Pardon me. All right. So all those in favor? Opposed? Motion's carried. All right. So we dealt with the first item. Is that correct? Okay, we're going to move on to item number 2, and then we're just going to do first and second. So
Just,
yeah, go ahead.
On the fees and charges, just on the standard of the fees that have come up or been established or proposed, where do they come from? How do they, are they comparable to
So
other communities?
just a point over, that's
The next
two
one
motions,
down.
two motions down.
Yeah, so we're gonna, so we've done this.
We were talking
Yeah,
about-
We're almost there.
Yeah, we're almost there. So let's bring that up in a moment. So we're gonna go number 2.
Yeah,
You want to make that motion?
yeah, that the municipal ticketing information amendment bylaw 2306 be read a first and second time.
Second for the motion, Councilor Charlotte. Discussion on this motion. Seeing none, I'll call a question. All those in favor? Motion's carried. Now, number 3, someone want to put that on, Councilor Palmer?
That the fees and charges amendment bylaw 2307 be read a first and second time.
Seconder, Councilor Ryan. Discussion on the motion now. Councilor Elliott, you have that question. Councilor Elliott was wondering where these charges come from. Any comment, Mr. Simon?
Through your worship to Councillor Elliott. So charges in our fees and charges bylaw need to be based on cost recovery. So not only, there's a couple components here. Council did pass a resolution directing staff to ensure that fees charged as part of short-term rental were sufficient to attempt to recoup the staff time and enforcement efforts that need to be undertaken. So the numbers that staff have come up with here in terms of wanting to increase the short-term rental business licensing fees are reflective of the nature of that resolution to try and get closer to this cost recovery with respect to the anticipated cost, not only on enforcement, but development services to administer these new regulations.
Great, thank you. Comment?
Question to the planner. I don't necessarily need the answer if we don't have it at the fingertips. It'll be fine on Thursday. But so you're proposing the short-term rental of $500. There, we may have a discussion on Thursday about whether that's an appropriate value or not. Do you know what the amount is for bed and breakfast?
50 bucks.
$50.
Okay, right, okay.
Okay. Councilor Ryan?
Yeah, so I won't be in support of this. I think they need to be increased quite a bit. I mean, I may support it just so that we can get to the next stage and discuss it, but on Thursday, as it's currently proposed, I don't think it's nearly enough, especially given that there's going to be a shortfall there. In my mind, even if we double the short-term rental fee, it's not going to make or break the decision for somebody to operate or not operate that short-term rental. And I think bed and breakfast fees should be increased significantly as well, maybe not to the same extent as short-term rentals, given that the revenue potential is less, but a significant increase beyond $50 seems warranted, given that so many people are going to pursue that option with the current rules.
Good. All right, thanks for that comment. And I don't disagree with you. I'm going to support this getting to second reading, and then we'll have that wholesome discussion on Thursday and go from there. Councilor Charlotte.
Thank you, Worship. I agree. I think that having a conversation around what that business license fee is going to be key, but I also recognize that I think it's probably going to be a phased process, getting it off in the works so that we can see what the actual implications and the timing and the staffing levels are. I think having that room to make incremental change over several years gives that space for people to learn, to adopt, to get into legalizing their vacation rentals, or short-term rentals, and slowly move towards that more accurate cost recovery, but not all at once when we don't know what that cost recovery looks like yet. I do have one question around that though. So if our charter and regulations say that we must do cost recovery, if we put the business license fees, say we do settle on the $500 and we come up short on cost recovery, what are the regulations on how in future years, can we cost recover for past expenses, or can it only be for that year?
Through your worship to Councillor Charlotte, I'm not sure if the finance director would have any comments on that. I don't believe that we would be able to retroactively go back to increase. It would almost be like a tax on new businesses as they're coming in to try and make up for the previous shortfall. But yeah, the director of finance may have something to add on to that too.
Ms. McCabe. You're muted.
We can't hear you. No.
We still can't hear
you. No.
We've got you in
Now we see
twins
you
right
twice.
now. That's kind of interesting, but we still can't hear you.
Through your worship, while Ms. McCabe is still working on that, one thing that we do need to review more holistically as well is all of the business license charges right now. And I'm just doing a quick look through our fees and charges bylaw. We have, I think, about 101 different uses in there that all have different fees. And a trend that a lot of municipalities are going to now is simplifying the types of uses and standardizing the fees a bit more. So something that is definitely on the radar of staff, but I think Ms. McCabe has her audio issue.
I do, thank you. Sorry, I'm joining from home and the sound quality from my computer is not always ideal. So I thought I could get away with doing video through my computer and sound through my iPad, but obviously that wasn't working. No, I don't believe we could increase fees to catch up on past shortages, just like you wouldn't decrease fees to cover past surpluses potentially. Fees can only be based on cost, as Mr. Simon has said. Unfortunately, we can't base fees on the revenue potential of a business, only on the cost of the city to issue the licenses and manage those businesses from a bylaw enforcement perspective.
That's what I expected, but nice and clarity. Thank you.
Good.
Just one other comment about increasing the fees for short-term rentals. I think if anything, it creates, like if it is a pretty sizable amount, if that is enough of a disincentive, then it encourages long-term rental, which is obviously great because we have such a low supply of long-term rental, but also if it doesn't disincentivize them, then they will pass that on to visitors, which is also not the worst thing. And then, yeah, just generally making it more appealing with a large license fee to, instead of doing short-term, do a long-term rental, which is great.
Good. All right, thanks for the comment, Councillor.
I think I've asked, and anytime we start dealing with fees, we don't operate in a bubble. What are other communities, what are other entities being charged? It should be some fairness to this, or some comparable. Revelstoke off on their own world doing a different thing. Then you want it to match. You want to be consistent, and people expect that. So we want to make sure that we include that in our discussion.
All right, that's good. Good point.
Yeah, I actually disagree. I think like whatever the amount is that makes the most sense from a cost recovery standpoint, and that makes it interesting and that like reasonable enough that somebody would be willing to still pay it if they're going to make money on it, but also have the city cover all of their expenses. If that's higher than any other community, I think it's still the right price.
Well, that's your opinion. I'm sure many people would be against that.
Totally. I'm just saying that I disagree with your perspective.
All right. Any other comments on the motion on the table? Seeing none, I'm going to call the question. All those in favor? Thank you, Councilor Brooks Hill. Motion has passed. All right, we're going to move on to 11A staff reports, CBT. Someone want to put that motion on the table for me? Councilor Charlotte.
The funding allocations in the amount of $393,056.31 from the Columbia Basin Trust Community Initiatives and Affected Areas Program for 2022, as recommended by the Program Evaluation Committee, to be approved by Council and sent to the Columbia Shuswap Regional District Board for approval.
Seconder for that motion, please. Councilor Elliott. Discussion on the motion. Councilor Charlotte.
I'm curious to the chair, the funding for the program comes from CBT. It is administered by the city of Revelstoke. I'm wondering, the policy on choosing programs, is that directed by city or is that directed by CBT?
It's directed by the committee, the program fund committee through the CBT. Is that not correct, Ms. Floyd?
That is correct, Your Worship. I believe that their kind of terms of reference are that the project needs to be of community benefit. So the 5 evaluators go through and they evaluate it in terms of social, environmental, or what kind of benefits it offers the city.
Understood. I'm curious as to whether if there's any prompt or requirement or discussion around local connections. I noticed some of the applications are from out-of-town organizations, and I'm wondering about the connection to the local organizations that do similar work to make sure there's synergies there.
Comment, Ms. Floyd?
That makes sense.
Through Your Worship, I think that even if it's an external or a non-local company that is offering a benefit to the residents of the city of Revelstoke, then it's supported. Jolene took over the running of this program this year, and she did check with CBT, and the evaluation committee basically gets to choose. So provided that it meets the community benefit portion of it, then it's supported usually.
Okay. And the reason why I'm asking is the conversations we've been having over the last few months and the last few years, and looking at how the city works with our local partners and how outside partners can sometimes come in and really add some great benefit to our community. But looking to how do we define social benefit and community benefit, and how do we make that as clearly defined as we can, so that it's not this ephemeral, what are you doing good for the community? It's, this is what our community wants. Show us how you align with these particular community benefits, these particular organizations or channels that are already doing a lot of good work. I might be barking up a weird tree on that one, so I'll leave it be. I just wanted to bring it up for a bit of conversation, because anytime I see unclear definitions, especially in that social and community benefit sector, it makes me a little bit antsy.
Well, when I look at the committee members, they're well entrenched in the community and very much aware of what's going on. So I'm supportive of what you're doing here. And that doesn't mean we can't have that conversation with CBT to make sure that those things align. But at this point in time, that's where we're at. Any other comments on these supporting this?
So just a question. So the CBT funds that are generated through the hydro contribution to this entity, is that right? And they said 93% of the funds that are to be allocated have been assigned. So is there more yet to be dispersed, or?
So Ms. Floyd, with the balance of the funds that are there, is that for latecomers, or do we know?
Through Your Worship, there is no balance. There is an administrative cost, so we get a portion of it for actually managing the program because it takes staff time.
Sure. All right. So all of the funds are dispensed.
Okay.
All right. Any other comments? Seeing none, I'll call the question. All those in favor? Opposed? Motion's carried. Thank you. Okay, moving on to item 11B, long-term financial plan. Someone want to put that motion on the table, please. Councilor Charlotte.
That the 2022-2036 long-term financial plan be approved.
Seconder for the motion, please. Councilor Ryan. Discussion on the motion. Councilor Ryan and then Councilor Charlotte.
Yeah, I have a few comments, about the document, the proposed budget document.
The guide to budget that you've got in your hands?
Yeah, that's the
That's
one.
number 2.
Okay, that's item number 2.
This first one's the big long one about it.
Oh, yeah, never mind.
Okay. Any discussion, Councillor Charlotte?
So one comment that I brought up to the Director of Finance, and I think it's just too late to get it in there for this round, but I just wanted to get it on the record to talk about, is that our section on debt looks at the debt currently and going forward. But part of the policy, and it is summarized in there, is that our policy is trying to move away from debt. And I think one of the important parts of any policy with a measurable metric is to look at how successful we've been. So having a section of, a piece of this section looking at our historical debt levels and the historical debt payments to see that over time and to see that shift.
Okay, yeah.
Because
Any
right
other
now-
comments, Councillor Elliott?
I don't know if it's the wisest path to move away from debt as a policy.
And that's where
I mean, when you, smart thinking goes, when you use debt, when it's the right thing to fund, right? Long-term debt for long-term assets. So entrenching it may not be right. And the other problem I have is we're looking too far into the future. 15 years becomes, it's a dreamscape, right? So if we're planning that far in advance, we're taxing today's residents, and that's assuming then that the city can handle better money that the public can utilize better than they can. So sticking it in our bank account and accumulating whatever we do with it from it just takes it away from the economy, and it takes away from the public. So it's a tricky road. It's a balancing system that we don't know the full implications. So I think it's tricky to build a big reserve.
Yeah, okay, appreciate that. Councillor Plummer, do you have a comment?
Thank you, Mayor Sulz. So first of all, the report gets it's a nice presentation. I won't go on my soapbox about some of the content, but I certainly appreciate staff's work in putting this together. Further to Councillor Elliott on debt, this financial plan on page 79 shows our debt almost doubling in 2024. So it anticipates robust use of debt.
So this is for the sewer plant.
I might not agree with that.
Okay, thanks for the comment. Yes. Councillor Ron?
Yeah, I just, to Council Elliott's point about the 15-year financial plan, I don't think this is meant or intended to be used as like the gospel. Obviously, these things change, but I do think it's fiscally responsible for us to be looking at the long-term plan, because if you don't, then we get ourselves into the same situation we're in now, where not enough money's been put away to update capital assets that have been degrading over the last 30 years. So I think it's supposed to be a roadmap for us so that we don't run into any issues 10 years ago. Oh no, we need like $30 million that we didn't know about.
Can I respond to that?
Yeah, of course.
I think putting the money into a bank account today sets you on a path. There's no redesign, there's no rethinking. You're saying, I'm doing this, this is the only way I'm going to do it. Where's innovation? Where's new modeling, new transportation systems? If we're set on this path, this is where we're going. So we're setting money aside.
No, we're definitely setting money aside, but it's not earmarked for certain exact projects. We don't know the design of the bridge that we're gonna build in 5 years, we just know we're gonna need a new bridge. So like, it's not, I don't think it's stifling creativity at all, it's just saying, you know, sure, maybe bridges are gonna be half the cost in 5 years, probably not. But if they are, that's still available to us, and if we don't save for it, then we're in worse position.
Ms. McCabe, you have your hand up.
Sorry, I'm having issues with things on my iPad now, apparently. But you can hear me?
Yeah.
I can hear you. Yeah.
Just to add to what Councillor Rind is saying, the long-term financial plan is a blueprint, but it's definitely not where we'll end up finally. When I first started many years ago at the city, I remember my predecessor constantly putting in a project out a number of years to replace City Hall. And that still hasn't been done, but the idea of long-term planning, which is considered best practices in local government finance, is to give you an idea of where you need to be in the future so that you can know what's coming down the road. How you're going to pay for that, whether it's putting money into reserves or borrowing money through debt, is a decision that can be made, by the council of the day.
Any other comments? Seeing none, I'll call the question.
Wait, oh, yeah, sorry.
All those in favor? Opposed? Note that Councillor Palmer is opposed, all of council is in favor. Moving on to item number 2. Someone want to put that motion on the table, please? Councillor Chabot.
The document, your guide to budget 2022, be approved for publication to the public.
Second for the motion, please. Councillor Ryan. Discussion on the motion. Councillor Ryan, go ahead.
Yeah, okay, so when I printed this off, I somehow lost the page number, so I'll just have to read like the header of this page, but it's on the page that says budget at a glance, that has the overall budget increase at 3.1%. On that page specifically, I'm a little bit confused about that. Is that the overall increase, or is it 4.5%, which is those two numbers at the bottom added together?
Ms. McCabe, do you want to make comment from Councillor Ryan, please?
Yes, so we are splitting the property tax increase. There's 2.5% for operational and other capital, I guess is the best way to put it. And then there is 2% that is specifically dedicated to transportation infrastructure. And so we've done it this way the last few years, partly in response to a way that other communities have been communicating it that the previous council preferred, because it actually clearly showed that 2% was going to be dedicated to roads. So I believe Golden was the one that began this process. And so a few other communities have picked up on it as well, and we've continued on with it as well. So it will be 4.5%, 2.5% to cover everything else to do with the city, and then 2% to do roads.
Okay, so in that case, I see now. So the 3.1% at the top is actually just a budget increase, not a tax.
Correct.
Yeah, I don't know if anybody else agrees, but I feel like that's a bit misleading. Not like intentionally, obviously. It's kind of confusing because it's on the same page as the tax increase. So I would say just removing that altogether, because it's on another page anyways.
Fair point. We could change that to just say the property tax increase.
Yeah, I think that would be good, because I was also searching for that in the first few pages, which is kind of like the item most people are going to be looking for, and I couldn't find that 4.5% anywhere.
That makes sense. Thank you for that comment. All right. Another comment?
Yeah. On that same page at the bottom, there's the dollar increases for water, sewer, Big Eddy, and garbage. I'm assuming that the dollars were used here instead of percentages, because the percentages are a scarier number. Is that right?
It was, sorry, through your worship, it was to make it a little bit more relatable so people would understand what it meant for them in dollar value. That was some critiques we got last year on the plan where we did it in percentages. And so, yeah, so we went with dollars this year, hopefully trying to improve the communication. Obviously, there's always little tweaks to be made.
Okay, so my recommendation then on this page is to be consistent and include both. So I would say in those circle figures, include the dollars, but for both, the property tax, because the 4.5% would be at the top of the page, and then you have the dollars for property tax and then property tax infrastructure, and then all the water rates, and then in small percentages underneath, you could have the percentages, but just comparing apples to apples, because at the bottom here, a mix of percentages and dollars seems like a bit confusing.
Well, when you do the percentages, everybody's property tax is going to be different, so it's hard to.
Yeah, but these are all averages, right?
All right. Councillor.
I don't think so. Water and sewer fees are a flat rate per property, isn't that correct?
That's correct.
So that is a flat rate increase for every property.
Okay, well, you
Property
can
tax
still put that, you can still put a little asterisk that just says like represents average for the average home price, because there's it breaks it down on the next page, or sorry, on page, whatever it is, the tax impact.
11.
Yeah, 11.
If I could.
Councillor Charlotte.
I really like what Councillor Ryan is talking about, because I agree. I think that overall budget increase at the top is a little confusing on that page. But one of the, building on what she's talking about, perhaps is having the property tax increase in percentages, that top section, and having that bottom section only about fees. We're talking about separating our property taxes from our fees next year anyways. Mm-hmm. This makes it property tax and fee increases. That would be able to separate those into two different sections of this page to help to make it, so then you're not looking at percentages and dollars in the same section. We could keep it as dollar increases for the fees, but a percentage increase for the property taxes, but really separating those out.
Okay, good. I appreciate that feedback. I actually like that. I definitely like that suggestion. I'll work with our communications contractor to make those changes.
Wonderful.
Okay. Any other comments on the guide?
Yeah.
Councillor Charlotte, and then I'll go to Councillor Palmer.
My question for this is asking about how this is going to be implemented in Talk Revelstoke. If there is a plan for just putting up the PDF and opening it for comments, if we're going to be leveraging any of the tools inside Talk Revelstoke for discussion or questions. I think there's an opportunity here to be able to have maybe a more dynamic conversation with questions and answers like we've seen in previous projects on Talk Revelstoke, rather than individual emails to a closed account that no one can see the responses.
So your worship, at this point, it is the plan was to put it up there and ask for general comments. But if there's a particular project or maybe feedback that council is looking for, we can certainly add some questions in to try to get some more specific feedback to help council with their decision making.
Right.
I'm thinking it's not so much that I'm looking for particular feedback on this one. I'm just really looking for opportunities to open up a conversation around how our city's budget works. And I think the breakdown of what's inside, like these headings that are linked in the document, are a great way to break it out into clear sections. And I don't have the capacity to understand, I think, myself, and this is why I was just curious about where we are with the project itself to do the communications on this. But I think in an election year, it's really important that we make sure our community understands what the budget looks like and what it means. Because there's some big moves in this in the next 4 years. And I'm really looking for opportunities to make that process more clear. I'd be curious from other councillors if there's a particular question or comment, or if there's like for example, the school safety project. It might be where those conversations on these big spending topics, like this is what we're spending on. Do you want to vote yes or no? Is this something that's showing you that we listened? Like that school safety project, right? To get a little bit more conversation to give that information to the community.
Okay, good comment. Councillor Palmer.
Thank you, Mayor Sulz. I think fellow councillors have captured most of those details on the percentages. I think that's been captured. On the communications portion, the shortcoming, in my opinion, I've expressed this before, is on the timelines, and that's why it's so essential to start really grappling with the capital projects for 2023 in October. Probably my biggest objection to this presentation for the public, before I talk about my biggest objection, I think they've done a nice job. I think it's very readable in many ways, and I think that's why we've had these questions. So good job on the overall presentation. My biggest criticism is on the final page, it says we want your opinion, but we're not going to give you any reasonable time to be able to digest this financial plan and provide that. So budget 2022, we want your opinion right there. And you have until April 27th to understand something that's very complex. And even if you do, you're able to give us anything of substance, the gun's going to be to our head to pass this thing, and we won't listen to it anyway. That's my criticism of it. And that's the importance going ahead, not just in an election year, but every year, providing ample opportunity for the public to provide meaningful input in a timely basis.
Good, appreciate that comment, because that's always a concern, right? Councillor Ron, do you have a question?
Yeah, or just a comment on that same page that we were chatting about before, with the 4.5% at the top. I don't know if this made it through, Ms. McKay, but I do think that we should be including at the bottom what those dollar amounts represent in terms of year-over-year increases, just in the name of being as transparent as possible. There are going to be some big scary numbers, but I do think that's council's responsibility to be able to stand behind that. And then on page, I don't know, the one that says tax impact, and it has the breakdown between It is basically like the same numbers that are shown on that original sheet, but a little bit more information about why those utility rates went up would be warranted, because it doesn't seem to have that much context in my mind. So instead of that honeycomb design at the bottom, maybe there could just be a little bit more information about why those rates needed to be increased.
Sorry, to your worship, can you tell me what page you're on?
I wish I could. It's page 10.
Oh, 10. There's a hard copy in your binder too.
The water and sewer operations are more clearly detailed in page 16 and 17. I think the fees conversation that's on that tax impact page on page 10 that you're looking at, Councillor Ryan, I think that could just be removed. It's stuck into the front of your binder.
Oh, thanks.
I think that could just be removed from that section, because those fees are looked at again on page 16 and 17.
Ah, I see what you're talking about.
So
You're talking
it's
about the water
just
sewer. Yeah.
Yeah, that overall tax impact, but like I said, we're trying to separate out those fees, so it's not part of the tax.
Yes.
Yeah.
Note taken. Thank you.
Well, I think the purpose of that sheet is for somebody to go, if they're not gonna read the whole thing.
But that's that budget at a glance, we already have that.
Yeah.
We're saying remove it from the following one?
From the detailed tax impact, the proposed budget tax impact, so the proposed annual budget, and then it goes into the tax impact on several pages.
Sorry, I have page numbers now.
So page 10,
Yes.
from page 10 to page 13 is looking at the tax impact and consolidated operating revenues. Then it goes, so yeah, till page 12 is the tax impacts in various different ways and angles to look at it. But this is digging deeper into that property tax increase, not the fees. The fees are dug into in further pages. And the overall picture is shown on that budget overview, the budget at glance on page 7.
Correct.
Where we'd already talked about separating out the property tax increase, and then that's detailed out, and then the fee increases, and that's detailed out, the sewer and water operations.
Yes.
So that helps more cleanly separate those two functions of the city.
So you're saying not on the budget at a glance to keep it there, but then to remove it from page 10?
That's right. So on the
Okay.
budget at a glance would have both property taxes and sewer fees. So if you want to look at it just in one page, you look at the at a glance. That's what it's for.
Yeah.
You want to dig in deeper, there's the deeper on the property taxes, and then there's the deeper on the water and sewer operations. Now, this is what I'm talking about with Talk Revelstoke, is for looking at a robust conversation like this, because I agree with Councillor Palmer. That question on the end is a little embarrassing, because we don't want their opinion for this. I want to check in that, do you feel heard? How are we on the right track? But when we look at page 6 and we look at how we build the budget, this is where that public feedback, if we have a robust mechanism to collect those stories from our community, I like this, but maybe you could do this better. Okay, great. How does that feed into next year's plan? Because this is where the public feedback could be feeding into those next steps before we start preparing the next budget, making this more of a closed loop rather than a one-way street.
Yeah, exactly.
When it comes to cross-linking and referencing, I really wanted to do a shout out to the designer, because the linking of the different sections in the plan is super helpful to be able to jump around to where you want to go. My hope, and I recognize this is probably beyond the scope of doing it in Talk Revelstoke this round, but this is why I keep harping on this, is that if we can cross-reference and link to those bigger projects, so that when you read the budget and you say, oh, 2% for infrastructure for roads, where's more information? Click here. Here's the report on our roads. Here's all the other details of what we're doing to improve the situation, because there are comments and I don't have a clean place to send them for more information.
Thank you for that, because I think that's important. We're going to be open and transparent, and we need to be able to see the comments from the community, but we also need to show them where we're at. So, Councillor Elliott.
Maybe I missed it, but I think Jackie touched on, it's 3.1% is the overall.
No.
That's the overall budget.
Yeah, so to me, if that's our lead, that's what we're trying to convey. That's our big story. Just reading an article, that's the first thing you see. 3.1% is the. But yeah, I know it's 4.5, but it's fully misleading. And I said, well, why would you say that? 4.5%.
Yeah, I think we already discussed that.
Yeah, and I say, so to me, that's just an editorial thing, and say, what is the message you want to send? And if you give the public a 20-page document on a budget, I got to ask how many people are going to read it.
That's why the one page.
So, I mean, I would say 5, 10 pages are probably as far as you want to go. And I say, you get 20, and then say, you put a ton of work to make it 20. And I say, I think it's overkill.
Yeah, well, if I could.
Yeah.
Further to that, this is why I've been pushing so hard on the digital. Because you can do a one page at a glance, it can be a poster, it could have a QR code to the top Revelstoke page. And if you want to learn more, here's at a glance. What does it mean to you? So I think the 4.5 is more important to put to the citizen, not the 3.1 budget increase, because that's for us.
Yeah, that's for us.
But that at a glance could be on a one-page poster that could go around the community. So you see, oh yeah, I know what's going on. I know the basics. You want to know deeper? There's the link. This is how you find that information so that you have it at your fingertips so that we can empower people to have more robust and more educated conversations. But they find the information they want. They don't have to dig through 20 pages or 400 pages or library of plans and bylaws that we have.
Councilor Palmer, you have another comment?
I'm suggesting call the question. I mean, we're doing quite a bit of wordsmithing.
Yeah, so I have one question. So do you have something very brief, Councilor?
I don't have something brief, I just have a bunch of more questions, just suggestions. I think they're important because this document is important.
Fair enough.
So on page 12, there is a column called budget percentages that I think can be removed completely because it's just confusing. If the budget dollar amount wants to be included, that's great, but just having the 1.7% beside the 2.5%, I think is just going to be confusing and not provide any additional information. So that's my suggestion for page 12.
Okay.
I also think when we look at the consolidated operating expenses and the revenues, it kind of led me to think about like what the surplus is, and maybe we could add like an asterisk or a point on page 14, mentioning that is going towards reserves, unless that's included elsewhere that I missed, but if I missed it, maybe it should be a little bit brighter. And then on page 15, the general operations, do those include capital expenses?
Ms. McCabe?
Through your worship, no, there's just operating expenses.
Right. And is there anywhere in here that shows the capital broken out?
Not in a budget perspective. We talk about the projects, some of the key projects and the budget amounts for them and the council priorities that they're addressing. But no, we don't actually provide dollar values for the total budget for the 5 years.
Okay. Yeah, because to me, it seems like a bit misleading because it's not really the full picture, you know? But yes. I guess if that's not in here usually, then that's fine.
It hasn't been in the past. We'll look at how we could potentially add it. I won't make any promises.
Yeah, fair enough. And then on the final page, or second to last page 19, that spike in debt that you see in 2024, that's the sewer plant and the arena rink and things like that, right?
Correct.
I think it might be worth mentioning that somehow, just putting a little sort of like circling that peak and just having a little note there, so that people aren't looking at this going, well, like council's just going to take out a lot of debt for, you know, a bunch of projects versus it being pretty specific ones.
Oh, thank you very much. I'll put that in the wording that's below.
Perfect. And those are my only comments.
Okay, Councilor Gillette, you have a comment?
That's fine. I think I may have commented at one point to take out the arena roof or to request that comment comes out because it's not probably going to be an arena roof.
Well, whatever.
Parks master plan.
But yeah, refer to it as the forum project, whatever you want to call it.
And the reason I put my hand up is I like what you're talking about with the capital, and I just wanted to share, it might feed into my conversation with the debt and the reporting on the debt, because that's part of the asset map of the community. We just finished doing that asset map, like looking at all of our buildings and looking at the maintenance plans and what do we need to do to be able to take care of these assets. And those larger buildings and that infrastructure is what we own as a community, where I think it's part of that larger conversation with the operational fee, with the utilities. But that might be part of that picture, is looking at what are our assets that we're then investing in, what are those, there's the operational costs of it that we've started looking at. But maybe the mapping of those capital projects in the future, in the past, and our assets could be a part of that reserves and long-term debt section of this document to make it more palatable to understand. And I just wanted to add one last comment about the because now Councillor Ryan has me thinking more about the separating of the fees from the taxes in all spots and looking at that consolidated operating revenue and expenses. If we're separating out taxes and fees, that's not going to work very well anymore because you're mixing the two in this.
Through your worship, that is true. It is a consolidated financial plan, the 5-year bylaw.
Right.
So that would be the reason for showing it all together. I understand what you're saying, but it is a 5-year consolidated bylaw that includes everything.
Okay.
So that would be my one consideration.
Understood. Okay, no, that's fair. That's fair.
Okay, so I'm going to ask one last question, Ms. McCabe. So when we're talking about this, the guide to budget be approved for publication, can you make the amendments to that publication? And we're still going to meet the timeline that we need to meet to get our budget done.
Through your worship, yes, your worship. The communications coordinator and I have been working, and we're prepared to make some of the these changes first thing in the morning, and then we'll publish right after that. So we are prepared for that. Yes.
All right. Good. Then I'm going to call the question. All those in favor? Opposed? Motion's carried. Thank you. Thank you, council, for your input. Thank you, staff, for your work. Moving on to item 11C, development permit application, RMR. So do you want to have any conversation, Mr. Simon, before I put this motion on the table?
To your worship and all of council, this is a development permit application for expansion of an existing maintenance facility out at Revelstoke Mountain Resort. So this is located a little bit further up, quite far away from the existing village base. That's off of Camosi Road. If there's any questions, yeah, you can see in the map there that's before council. It's pretty far up, well past Monashee and Mackenzie Court. And they will be looking at doing an addition to maintenance facility. Right now, a lot of their maintenance operations are kind of centralized on what will be the future employee housing parcel. So they are looking at preparing for future consolidation of all their maintenance operations so that they're kind of out of scope from the public view.
Thank you for that comment. Can I get someone to put this motion on the table, please? Councilor Palmer?
Yeah, I'll do it as written.
All right. Second, please. Councilor Charlotte. Discussion on the motion. Any further questions, Councilor Palmer?
Yeah, it kind of looks ugly, but nobody will see it, so it's okay.
Thanks for that. Councilor Charlotte.
The requirements under the Environmental Management Act comment. I'm wondering if staff could speak to that a little bit more. I'm always curious about the environmental monitoring of what goes on and how that gets watched.
So through your worship, Councillor Charlotte, so the requirements under the Environmental Management Act relate to contaminated sites. So back in February 2021, I believe, there were changes to the Environmental Management Act and the Contaminated Sites Regulation that's embedded within that act, respecting contaminated sites. And those changes do not allow local government to issue development permits, rezoning applications, building permits, unless they get clearance from the province prior to any of those construction activities under the Environmental Management Act. And that's for sites where there's a history of what are called Schedule 2 activities. And in this particular case, given that there are existing more light industrial operations on site, they would fall within there. And what we found is that it is a bit of a process going through when you do need to get those approvals under the Environmental Management Act. So we've been in correspondence with the province, and they are okay if we have conditions on the development permit so that no works are actually authorized until they meet that. But then it helps usher applications through the process, and it's a conditional approval that they still can't authorize any works until they meet their obligations. So it's a check and balance system that's in place at the provincial level that we are the ones that are responsible to administer.
Good. Well, thank you.
All right, Councilor Palmer.
Through the planner,
So the agent for the owner, Lindsay McIntyre, I believe is a registered professional, environmental professional. So is that work, and there's a summary there of evaluation, staff evaluation, is that based on Ms. McIntyre's assessment, or was there an independent? And I guess the question is the, is it the wolf in charge of the hen house here kind of thing? And in just in a sense, is there a bias in that, or are you satisfied that the conditions are going to be met?
Mr. Sullivan?
So through your worship, I will say staff are satisfied with the information that's been received to date with respect to this particular proposal. You'll notice in the development permit area, the letter that's submitted with the application is with respect to any streams. So things that would trigger review under the Riparian Area Protection Regulation, Water Sustainability Act. And you'll actually notice in the development permit area, there's not only the expansion of the maintenance building, but also expansion of a parking facility. There is a stream that cuts through that parking facility. So this permit is very specific that no works for that parking facility are permitted right now until they get their approvals under the Water Sustainability Act. And that's what that letter from Ms. McIntyre as a qualified environmental professional indicates.
Great. Any other comments or questions? Seeing none, I'll call the question. All those in favor? Motion's carried. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Simon. Appreciate that. We're going to move on to item 11D, development permit application 307 Downey Street. So someone want to make that motion, please? Councilor Palmer?
Yeah, I'm pleased to make this motion. I think it's had a little bit of a history in the time I've been here, and I'm glad to see the work that's being done. So I move that the development permit DP 2019-12 be approved at 307 Downey Street, and the rest as per written.
Right. Seconded by Councilor Charlotte. Discussion on the motion. Seeing none, I'll call the question. All those in favor? Opposed? Motion's carried. Thank you. Moving on to item number 2. Someone want to make that motion, Councilor Plummer?
I'll put the motion on as written.
Okay, seconder for that motion, Councilor Charlotte. Any discussion on that motion? Seeing none, all those in favor? Motion's carried. Moving on to 12A correspondence. So I got a letter regarding Canadian Municipality Challenge for the city to pledge $1,000 to the Canadian Red Cross Humanitarian Aid for Ukraine. This challenge has been accepted.
Item DE.
Am I missing something?
Yeah, the form.
I'm not seeing that.
No.
Okay.
CD.
Yeah, I'm not seeing that here.
Sorry, Councillor, through your worship, that item was removed from the agenda. I sent an email out.
Okay, sorry.
Good, thank you. All right, so correspondence, I'll just go back on. I received this letter. I wanted to bring it to council. I'm in favor of us pledging $1,000. Other municipalities are doing that. I think it's a great thing, and it's going to an organization that will assist. So any comments or questions? Let's put the motion on the table first. Councilor Ryan?
That the city pledge $1,000 to the Canadian Red Cross Humanitarian Aid for Ukraine.
Okay, second for that motion. Councilor Elliott, any further discussion on that motion? Councilor Charlotte?
As much as my heart breaks for what's going on in Ukraine, because that is horrifying what is going on. Our community has a no proclamations policy. We have made a couple of exceptions over the time. To clarify, this would be money from one of our, where would the money come from for this pledge?
Ms. Floyd, can you explain where we were going to get the money from?
Sure, Your Worship. So when the mayor first brought this to me, I discussed with Director McCabe, and we thought that it would be appropriate to come from the council special presentations budget line item.
What is that for?
Ms. Floyd?
I'll actually defer that to to Director McCabe. She might have some more details on it.
Okay.
Through your worship, it's actually called the council contingency budget. It's a budget amount that's included in the budget every year, has been for decades. And it's basically there to allow council to do special things like this when they want to help the community that's outside of the normal processes that we have, such as the grant and aid program.
Clarifying.
How much is it?
I believe it's 25,000, but it might be 20. I'm sorry, I can't remember the exact amount.
All right.
How much did we use last year?
Through your worship, I can't tell you how much was used last year. I'm going to say I don't think anything was, and that isn't uncommon, but the money is there just in case. Or the budget amount is there just in case.
Okay. Councillor Palmer, did you have a comment?
Thank you, Mayor Sulz. With concern about proclamations and this being outside the normal process, I don't see this as a proclamation. I had to really think about this because really it is a gesture. It's not even, it doesn't really affect anything. So it's kind of more about helping us feel good about ourselves that we're doing something because everybody's so desperate and we want to do that. The risk, of course, is making inappropriate decisions on behalf of the tax base. I'm supportive of this. If it wasn't for the Canadian Red Cross, it was some obscure thing, I probably would have opposed it. But at least we know it's going into a reputable organization and it isn't going to be money squandered as such. And so I'm supportive, and it's aligning of all those concerns that we have, and I think it's fair on behalf of the taxpayers saying, yeah, it's $1,000, but this resonates with us as a community, and it's a gesture saying that we care. It's not really doing much by itself other than creating that sort of awareness. So I think it's important from that perspective.
Thank you for that. Councillor Schumann.
Yeah, thanks for that. It's something I struggle with because we talk about equity and being fair, and if it's going to apply to one thing, it should apply to all things. But I agree. I think one of the things that's really struck me coming out of Ukraine is seeing the municipal leaders stepping up, and it's
Getting shot.
puts things in perspective, right? We have first world problems. So with that and seeing the other municipal leaders taking lead on this, I will also vote in support. Finding out that we have that budget and that it's typically not used and we typically don't talk about it makes me want to talk about hosting some events, especially potentially this year, where as the school year wraps up, can we have a youth council? Can we host some events to get us talking and provide some entertainment or food, or if we have the budget for it, to hire someone to help us throw a few events this summer as a community from council? I think that would be something that might be a fun idea to pursue, but otherwise I'll leave it with that.
Okay, any other comments on the motion on the table? Councillor Elliott.
Just a question on the unused portion of this fund. So in years past, where we didn't contribute, that money was put into general operating surplus.
Comment, Ms. McCabe?
That's your worship, that's correct. It just falls into the general surplus, and if it's not spent. There was it has been spent over the years, don't get me wrong, it does get used. It's been used by council sometimes to I really can't think of any examples off the top of my head, but I promise it has been used at times for very good reasons.
Okay. All right.
And the surplus eventually gets to reserve if we never use it. Is that what I understand?
For Ms. McCabe.
The surplus would stay an accumulated surplus to be used if there's ever a deficit one year.
Okay. Yeah.
That wasn't budgeted for, obviously.
All right, I'll call the question.
Go ahead. So the number was just like a suggested amount, are other cities pledging a similar amount?
Yes.
Okay, yeah, in support of this.
Okay. I'll call the question. All those in favor? Opposed? Motion's carried. Thank you. All right. Communications Advisory Planning Commission meeting minutes. Any comments? Any questions? Seeing none, I'm going to move on to questions from the press. Ms. Floyd, any questions?
No, Your Worship, there were no questions received from the
All right.
press.
I'm going to ask for a motion to go in camera pursuant to section 90.1A and K of the Community Charter. Council Palmer, seconded by Councilor Charlotte. All in favor? Motion's carried. We'll go in camera. We'll take a couple minute break.